On this episode of The Word Made Fresh, we're going to talk about how to feed 5,000 people. Hi everyone, I'm Reverend Jim Keat, digital minister at the Riverside Church, and this is The Word Made Fresh, the weekly video Bible study where we talk about an upcoming lectionary passage or liturgical theme, and then you can comment about it here. You can use this for Bible studies you're teaching or leading, or sermons you're preaching, or just, if you just wanted to have a little midweek pick-me-up or Bible geek moment, here you go. Okay, so this week we're looking at the gospel passage from the lectionary, which is Matthew 14, verses 13 to 21. It's one of those great stories from Matthew. You're probably familiar with it. And yes, you heard me in the intro, feeding the 5,000. So let's just read it first, and then we'll chat about it for a little bit. And then we'll go off and live our lives and be better people for the world around us. No small expectation for this video, right? Okay, here we go. Now, when Jesus heard this, this being that John the Baptist was arrested, right? No, beheaded. His cousin. So Jesus just heard some not so good news. You should go watch last week's episode about all things working together for good, in case you need to know what sort of pastoral care not to give to Jesus right now with this sort of bad news. Anyway, okay. Now, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. Good for you, Jesus, taking the time for self-care and to grieve properly in the midst of this traumatic change in the world and in your family. That's just the sermon right there. Jesus models self-care and boundaries. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. Oh, crowds. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. Way to go, Jesus. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they can go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." The disciples replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled. And they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So let's just go in reverse. First off, it's a misnomer to say it's the feeding of the 5,000, because that's only counting the men. Oh, the Bible is so good at just centering men. So this is really feeding of like the 15,000. Let's just call it for what it is. Someone fix that in your Bible. So scratch it out and rewrite the heading, feeding of the 15,000. Just add a 1. There we go. Feeding of the 15,000. Now, like I said, you're probably somewhat familiar with this story, specifically the whole feeding of the 15,000 moment. Maybe the whole Jesus grieves by himself and then has compassion moment was maybe a new insight for you. But the last part here, feeding all the people, you've heard that story. Mainly because this isn't the only place this story exists. This is in other Gospels, and in some of the other Gospels, which one? Specifically in the Gospel of John, which is its whole other thing because it was written much later and all this. Well, that one adds a detail of a boy giving Jesus the food that he blessed and they used. So it kind of asks the question, where did the food come from? Saying someone shared their lunch with Jesus, and then suddenly there's enough food for everybody. I like that train of thought for a couple reasons, but I think it kind of just highlights one of the probabilities of what happened here. Now, you might be reading this and you might think of flannel graph from childhood, and it's like Jesus does some hocus pocus and suddenly, boom, there's food for everybody. He takes one sandwich and makes 15,000 out of it. That's a cool trick. Or perhaps there's another way of looking at this story. Could it be that in John's version, we see this boy sharing with Jesus, or here in Matthew's version, it's just the disciples say, "This is all we have"? Could it be that Jesus takes what's around him and shares it? Or this young boy shares with Jesus, and that act of sharing what you have with those in need, the crowd, the 15,000 people suddenly go, "Well, I guess I have an extra half of a sandwich I can share. I guess I have a few pieces of fruit I can share." And suddenly everyone starts sharing what they have, making sure that everyone receives what they need. And what's the result? Well, 12 basketfuls left over. I like this approach to this miracle for a couple of reasons. I actually think it's more miraculous. I mean, if Jesus can just snap his fingers and make 1,000 pieces of bread appear, that's a pretty cool trick. Why don't you do that all the time whenever there's hungry people? But the real miracle is all of the people shifting from their selfish ways and finding ways to share with those who are in need. Let's be honest, that would be a miracle if this sort of thing happened in our capitalistic-driven world today. It's easy to just hold on to what you have and to hoard more and more, to stockpile for yourself, because someday I might need this. All the while, people who actually need something are left without anything. And when that mindset flips, when that paradigm shifts, when people who have realize that they can share with those who have not, so that we all rise together, that's a miracle. So I offer all this to just say there's another way of looking at this story. It's not just Jesus does a magic trick. Could it be that the real miracle is the ways in which the crowd sees themselves and the world differently and lives differently as a response? That would actually have the best impact, because suddenly it's not just a free meal for 15,000 people, but it's 15,000 people who live differently every day in the future. If I had to pick, I would pick that miracle every time. So, yeah, have you thought about the text like this before? Have you thought about the feeding of the multitude story in this sort of share what you have with those in need until everyone has what they need kind of approach? Leave your thoughts about that way of seeing this story below, and share any other thoughts you have about what it means for us to see miracles like this happening in our lives and in our world. The paradigm shift being the miracle, and the way it becomes an ongoing impact in not just our lives, but the lives of so many people who are desperately in need around us. All right, I'm going to spin in circles on my chair. And see you next week. Oh, maybe. Actually, these are going to go on pause for a little bit because I'm about to have a baby. Yeah! So, yeah, I'll be kind of learning how to do that whole dad life thing for a bit, and just spending all my nights changing diapers and doing all the things that new parents do. But this will be back, I promise. So maybe next week. Basically, when these stop happening is when you know I've had the baby. Well, not me, but my wife. You know how that works. This picture frame, it currently has nothing in it, but it's going to have a picture of my baby. That was the plan all along behind this picture frame. All right, now I'm out of here. See you next week. Maybe. Hopefully. Hopefully not. I don't know. I'll see you soon.